You called it practical. I called it a slap in the middle of dinner and a 2-line stick hitting the floor. The fork chimed against my plate, bright as a bell I hadn't asked to hear. Ethan's hand came down fast. Reflex dressed up as righteousness, and the room rearranged itself around the sound. A salt shaker toppled. The roasted carrots slid in their butter. Somewhere outside, a lawn sprinkler ticked on, counting seconds in a yard that didn't know our table had cracked. The taste in my mouth turned metallic and wrong, and I was up, chair back scraping tile, hand to my lips as my stomach lurched. I made it as far as the sink. When I turned, still breathing through the burn, my purse slipped from my shoulder, tipped, and the small plastic stick bounced once, twice, then settled by the table leg. 2 lines. Not rumor, not opinion. Evidence. Diane's breath caught, not out of concern, out of interest. She sat with her napkin pinched like a corsage between fingers that had never learned to unclench. "Well?" she said, her voice like a door closing quietly. Someone knocked. 3 polite raps. Mrs. Alvarez from next door, silver hair, quick eyes, had heard the sharp note that definitely wasn't a TV laugh track. "Everything okay?" she asked through the screen, already knowing it wasn't. I saw Ethan's face then. Confusion warring with shame. A boy who had touched a stove and wanted the stove to apologize. Diane didn't move. I picked up the stick, rinsed my mouth, and said to Mrs. Alvarez, "Could you stay a minute?" The sprinkler kept counting. The butter congealed. The night learned our names. Freeze the frame here. The version of me standing at that sink knew 2 things at once. That I was in danger if this house kept running on Diane's voltage, and that I wasn't the only heartbeat in the room anymore. I folded my palm over my belly without making a ceremony of it. I am a librarian. I believe in documentation. I believe in evidence gathered quietly, dates written in the margin, receipts tucked where they can be found when the voices get messy. We hadn't always sounded like this. There was a time, easy to remember because it happened to be true, when Ethan made me laugh in line at the HEB by inventing biographies for the produce. The pineapple wore a crown because she'd stepped down from public life and now ran a nonprofit. The russet potatoes were the cousins no one invited to weddings, but who showed up with good stories anyway. He had grease under his nails from fixing friends' trucks and a sunburn in the shape of his sunglasses. He asked what day I did laundry and switched his gym schedule so he could fold towels with me. We were ordinary and proud of it. We eloped in a borrowed chapel in Wimberley and moved into a rental in South Austin with creaky floors that sounded like old men clearing their throats. Diane arrived 6 months later with a suitcase that had inherited opinions. "Temporary," she said. Just while her condo had work. Scraped baseboards, a faucet that rattled, an HOA that apparently required proximity to her son. She brought plants that drooped like they were acting, a jar of homemade pickles, and a running commentary I mistook for personality. She pointed out dust I had already seen. She had notes about the way I seasoned chicken. She didn't like the mug I used for coffee because the rim was men's width. Every suggestion was a pebble in a shoe, not fatal, just a reminder that walking was not the point. Then came the whispers. Not words at first, just the lean in, the hand on Ethan's elbow, the sigh that meant there would be a translation of my day into a dialect I didn't speak. "She's guarded," she'd tell him in the doorway, like a cat describing a door. "She doesn't want you to worry." The implication hung there, that secrecy and safety were the same thing in my mouth. I saw it begin to work on him, the tilt, the recalibration. He was a good man trying to be a good son, while I tried to keep our house from becoming a stage. When I saw the second line bloom in the bathroom, pink like a quiet siren, I sat on the closed lid and counted tiles. I rehearsed the announcement, how I would tell him over dinner, how he would cover my hand with his, how Diane would have to choose love for a grandchild or love for being right. I didn't anticipate the slap. I didn't anticipate nausea that didn't care about perfect moments. And I didn't anticipate the way Diane's eyes narrowed at the stick on the floor as if it were a prop I'd planted. "You've been somewhere," she'd said earlier that afternoon while I chopped garlic. "Heard your phone. Laughter?" It had been a colleague's voicemail about a book drive. It didn't matter. Suspicion does not require a target. It only requires air. Mrs. Alvarez stepped inside when I asked her to. She didn't touch me. She didn't make a sound about the stick. She looked at Ethan and said the kind of sentence that saves nights. "I heard something unpleasant. I'm here if Maya needs a ride." She was a fact in a room stewing in opinion. I hung on to her like a comma. Ethan said, "It was an accident." Diane said nothing, which had the effect of a lecture. I looked at my husband and made my voice very small on purpose, because the house paid more attention to small voices than loud ones. "I need air," I said. "Tomorrow, I'll send you something." What I sent the next afternoon wasn't a paragraph. It was sound. Dr. Patel's office had a monitor that washed the room in bluish light. She was brisk in a kind way that made me want to meet her standards. "You've had a shock," she said, after I told her the short, careful version. "Let's make a plan." She invited me to breathe with her, counted to 4, and found the heartbeat. It was a quick, brave noise. She turned the screen toward me and didn't narrate it to me like I was a child. She printed one image for my file, recorded a piece of the heartbeat on my phone so I could decide who would hear it, and gave me a card with her name and the direct line for emergencies. I drove to the H-E-B parking lot and sat under the shadow of the old oak like it could keep the sun from making the note too bright. I sent Ethan the audio clip. No caption, no plea, just the truth. He called within minutes, the way people do when they're not sure whether they're allowed to cry. He apologized. He said the word accident again, then swallowed it before I had to. I told him I would meet him the next day at Cosmic Coffee, where we used to split a colache and plan our ordinary future like it was a project we could finish on time. I set 3 folders on my kitchen table that night: bank, house, notes, like tools laid out before a repair. I wrote down the date, the slap, the witness, the audio file. I put the test stick in a Ziploc. I am not dramatic. I am a woman who has watched a patron return a library book 3 months late and swear he brought it back on time until the barcode said otherwise. Paper is quiet and powerful. So are timestamps. At Cosmic, the baristas moved like they were choreographed by someone who liked order. I took the table near the fig trees. Ethan sat with his palms flat on the wood like he was ready to be searched. "I'm sorry," he said. I told him apology was the floor, not the ceiling. I told him I had 3 conditions, boundaries with names and hinges. 1, I said, holding up a finger I kept very steady. Diane moves out and has no access to our home, our mailbox, our devices, or our calendars. No surprise visits. No questioning me through you. If you choose to see her, you do it elsewhere. He nodded too fast. Of course, yes. 2, I said. We start couples therapy, and you attend individual sessions to learn the difference between loyalty and enmeshment. I will attend my own. We will talk about what happened without euphemisms. His throat clicked when he swallowed. Okay. 3, I said. We make a legal safety plan. If there is another incident, verbal, physical, or digital harassment, we file a restraining order. I am already documenting. I will continue to document. This is not a threat. It's a boundary with teeth. He put his face in his hands and stayed there long enough for the ice in his cup to soften its edges. When he looked up, he said what I needed to hear first. You're right. Then he said what I needed to hear second. I'll tell her. He did. I believed him because for a while it seemed to work. Diane moved into a short-term rental with countertops she didn't like. Ethan forwarded me a therapist's contact named Dawson, a man whose biography did not read like a TED Talk. We sat on Dawson's couch and said sentences that made us both wince. I learned how to say, "I will end this conversation now," without asking for permission to end it. Ethan learned that the speed of his reactions had been trained by a childhood where thinking was a luxury. He cried once in a way I had not seen since the day his father's truck was towed away forever. It felt like we might be building something that didn't require someone else to bleed. Then the small things began to go missing. Not objects, privacy. At the library, where I register new cards and help high schoolers find sources that will pass a teacher's sniff test, I saw a silhouette near the stacks that didn't belong to a Tuesday morning. Diane has a stance like someone trying on patience in a dressing room. She stood near the community board, pretending to read about a food pantry she would never enter. I texted Ethan, "She's here." He replied, "I asked her not to." He did not say, "She'll leave." I walked to the information desk and said to my colleague, "I'm going to step outside for a moment." On the sidewalk, I photographed the license plate I knew by heart and saved the time and location in notes. At home that night, Ethan said Diane had just wanted to talk. I said Diane could send a letter if she had thoughts. He said she worried about me with the baby. I said, "Worrying without boundaries is just control in a cardigan." The next week, Mrs. Alvarez told me she'd seen Diane on our street in a car she didn't recognize. She said it like a neighbor does, with a small apology tucked in for being the bearer of a thing that already has a bearer. I thanked her, wrote it down, and moved the porch camera angle 2 clicks to the left. The day I learned our child was a girl, Dr. Patel smiled with her eyes first. Ethan held my hand like it was delicate and hooked to a monitor. On the drive back, we stopped for tacos because joy is a muscle you have to exercise even when your life is studying other subjects. In the parking lot, Diane stepped from behind a truck as if the universe were a stagehand who owed her a favor. She started with my name. She said it sweet. She asked to talk. I said, "No." She moved closer. A security guard walking a daytime loop saw the shape of the moment and walked toward us before words could turn into something worse. I recorded a 30-second video that showed context without commentary. When we got home, I emailed Addie Morgan. The subject line was pattern. Morgan is the kind of lawyer who doesn't tell you the law like it's a myth. He tells you how a judge will see it between sips of his now cold coffee. Document. Do not engage. If she appears again, call APD non-emergency and make the report. We will escalate to a temporary RO if needed, he said. I slept with my phone charged and not under my pillow. Therapy helped and didn't, which is to say it did the real thing. It made the truth clear and left the decisions to us. Dawson asked Ethan about the difference between protection and possession. He asked me about my tolerance for hope. We talked about cycles, how some families pass down recipes and others pass down reactions. Ethan admitted that when Diane criticized me, he felt like he was 12 again and being asked to prove he could be a good man by choosing the loudest person's comfort. He said he didn't want our child to learn that lesson. I believed him. I also believed my notes. 2 days later, Diane left a small box on our porch with a rattle inside, engraved with a name we hadn't shared with anyone. It wasn't the name we'd chosen, but it was a name, a claim, an inscription that said, "I am part of this, whether you invite me or not." The camera caught her approach, her posture, the way she looked straight into the lens like it was a person she could outstare. I forwarded the clip to Morgan. He replied with a single line, "We're ready." That night, Ethan said the word restraining order like it had corners. I told him it did. He asked if we were really doing this to his mother. I said we were doing it for our daughter. He nodded and didn't speak for a long time. When he did, he sounded like a man reading aloud the rules of a house he wanted to live in. "Okay," he said. "Okay." We filed for a temporary restraining order on a Thursday, the kind of Texas afternoon that tries to melt your decisions before you can sign them. Morgan guided us through the paperwork like a patient traffic cop. He did not promise outcomes. He promised process. He stapled copies, highlighted dates, and reminded us that safety is both a feeling and a file. Ethan's signature shook a little. Mine didn't. When we left, he stood on the sidewalk and looked up at a sky so clear it felt like a lie. "I hate that it's come to this," he said. "It came to this a while ago," I answered. "We're just writing it down." At home, we changed our locks and our routines. The porch camera sent short updates that mostly showed squirrels having arguments. Ethan disabled location sharing with anyone but me. We set our phones to require Face ID for every message preview. I put Mrs. Alvarez's number on a yellow sticky note by the door and promised myself I would use it if I needed to. We practiced what Dawson called exit sentences, short phrases that end a conversation without inviting a new one. I'm not available for that. This isn't a debate. Goodbye. Ethan said them out loud until they sounded like his. We moved our prenatal appointments to a different hospital across town, one that required a code at the front desk and didn't say your last name out loud when they called you. Dr. Patel approved the change and told me she'd already informed the charge nurses. "This will feel inconvenient," she said, "until the moment it feels life-saving." She gave me a laminated card with a direct security number and asked if I wanted a social worker to visit us at home to talk safety plans. We said yes. The social worker's name was Pilar. She had a way of sitting on our couch like it had always been there, like we were the ones who had been away and were now back where rules exist. She asked about our windows, our routines, our neighbors, our trust. She didn't ask why we hadn't done any of this sooner. "People don't build fire escapes," she said, "until they smell smoke." Diane tested edges the way people do when edges are new. The first weekend after we filed, a bouquet without a card arrived at our door. The florist, unsure, had written our last name in pencil on the receipt and tucked it under the ribbon. The camera caught a delivery van and a driver who had nothing to confess. We called the florist and asked who placed the order. They couldn't disclose. Morgan sent a letter. The second time, the bouquet arrived at my workplace with a note for Baby B. No signature. The library has its own cameras. So does the intersection 2 blocks away. Pilar told me that sometimes the point of a restraining order is not just to stop proximity, it's to build a ledger. To show a pattern so clear, even someone with a reason not to see it cannot deny it. The night before my due date, I walked the hallway in socks because everyone tells you to walk. Ethan read out loud from a baby book that seemed to have been written by a committee. He stopped and said, unprompted, "I used to confuse quiet with peace. They're not the same." I put my palm where our daughter pressed a heel against the wall of me and said, "We'll teach her the difference." Labor started the next morning, like a sentence that had been waiting for a verb. The hospital checked us in under the name on a card Dr. Patel had prepared. Security walked us from the desk to the elevator in a way that didn't look like security to anyone else. In the room, the nurse did not ask about grandparents. She asked who I wanted present. "Just us," I said. She nodded like she'd been waiting to hear it. She taped a small sign to our door that meant no visitors without explicit permission. It looked like a cartoon owl reminding the world to be quiet. "This," she whispered, "is diplomacy for safety. Labor is work. It does not care about plot twists or anyone's need for a catharsis. It demands breath and surrender and the kind of focus that makes you forget you ever knew other verbs." Ethan kept his palm on my shoulder like a lighthouse. The nurse counted for me when counting helped and stayed quiet when it didn't. Dr. Patel, arrived with the kind of calm that comes from having lived through bad nights and good ones and knowing which one this was. When our daughter finally arrived, she came with a cry that sounded like a protest and a promise in one. They placed her on my chest. Ethan cried the way men do when something important has chosen them. I put my face in her hair, which had somehow already decided to be a color, and I said her name to her like a secret we would not share with anyone until we were ready. Downstairs, someone delivered a small arrangement of lilies. Security intercepted it before it learned our door number. There was a note again. From family. The guard asked if we wanted it destroyed. We did. We asked for the note to be photographed first. It had the kind of loops in the handwriting that belonged to someone who never learned to apologize with words. We stayed 2 nights. On the morning we checked out, the nurse handed me a folder with aftercare instructions and a card with a phone number I could call if anyone tried to access our records without permission. "It happens," she said. Not to frighten me, but because adults tell the truth. Ethan wheeled me to the car like he'd been practicing. He had. He had practiced weather and exit sentences and naming things what they were. The first week home was a geography of soft noises and time naps and a clock that meant nothing. Mrs. Alvarez brought a casserole that did not ask for an audience. She knocked once, set it down, and walked back across her lawn like she was leaving bread for birds. Dawson called to congratulate us and to remind Ethan that new fathers can confuse exhaustion with failure. We ignored the doorbell twice. We recorded 3 cars that slowed in front of our house longer than cars should. We fed our daughter at 2 and at 5 and at not exactly 8 and learned that love is not a feeling. It's a schedule you hold to even when your hands want to shake. The hearing to extend the restraining order fell on a Wednesday. We brought Morgan, our videos, our printouts. Diane brought an expression that said she was tired of being misunderstood by amateurs. The judge did not have time for theater. She had a docket, and our story was not the only one. She looked at the clips, read the timestamps, and listened to Ethan say, "I let things happen because I wanted to be a good son, and I forgot I was also a husband and a father." She listened to me say, "I am not angry. I am finished." She signed the extension. Diane's mouth made a shape that in other contexts might have been surprise. The bailiff took a paper from one desk to another. A clerk stamped a date. It was bureaucratic and holy in the way that order sometimes is. We walked out into sunlight that felt earned. Weeks turned into a season. Our daughter learned the difference between mourning and not mourning. Ethan went back to work and came home the way you're supposed to, on time, on purpose. Pilar checked in and reminded us that safety gets complacent when it works. We nodded and set a reminder to revisit our plan every month, like normal people do with budgets. Sometimes I forgot we had ever eaten a dinner that cracked. Then the supermarket happened. I was in the cereal aisle comparing sugars like a librarian with a sweet tooth when I heard my name pronounced as if it belonged to a game show. "Maya?" Diane stood at the end of the aisle holding a basket with 2 lemons and a magazine about gardens. She smiled the way someone smiles when they are trying to look like a memory. I felt the old ladder of my nerves look for a rung. I did not offer it one. "I'm not available for that," I said, the sentence smooth now, a well-used tool. She took a step, then another, then stopped, because 3 different things happened at once. A store employee appeared beside the end cap, like he had materialized from the sale on granola bars. Mrs. Alvarez turned the corner with a cart and the kind of eyebrows that could cut a ribbon, and my phone began to record without making a noise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the moment decide whether it was dramatic. I held onto my cart and, because Pilar had coached me, turned my body at a slight angle so my shoulder faced her instead of my chest. "Goodbye," I said. Then I rolled my cart past her like she was exactly what she was, a person in a store who was not part of my life. In the parking lot, I sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel and practiced not shaking. I sent the clip to Morgan for the file. I texted Ethan, "Saw her, I'm okay." He replied with a heart, and then, a minute later, with a full sentence like an adult. "Proud of you. Proud of us." Sometimes people ask why I didn't torch the relationship, why I didn't stand on the lawn with a megaphone and shout my story into the cul-de-sac. I tell them I prefer proof to performance. I tell them justice is not a mood. I tell them the most radical thing I did was make a list. Call doctor, record heartbeat, set conditions, file paperwork, pack hospital bag, hold my daughter, learn the shapes of no. I tell them that Ethan and I didn't heal because a judge signed a form. We healed because we learned to name what we would and would not allow, and then we did not allow it. We learned to make our house a place where quiet finally meant peace. On a Sunday in late September, we took a walk around the block as a family of 3. The sun was the kind that flatters everything it touches. Our daughter wore a hat that made strangers indulgent. Mrs. Alvarez waved from her porch and then went back to her crossword. A boy on a scooter raced a dog and lost and didn't mind. At the corner, Ethan squeezed my hand and said, "I keep thinking about cycles." I said, "Me too." He said, "We broke one." I looked at our house, the camera, the door we had locked and unlocked ourselves, and I said, "We did." Inside, while our daughter slept, I opened the folder where we had kept everything: the notes, the audio clip, the court documents, the letters we would never send. I added one last page: the discharge paperwork from the hospital with our daughter's name printed in a font that made the world look uncomplicated. I wrote the date in the margin, then I closed the folder and put it on the highest shelf. Not because I wanted to forget, but because some stories are better as reference than as weather. If you're listening, because you recognize pieces of this. Because a voice in your house learned to make you small, because you have a folder too. Because someone told you that being practical means living in a story you did not write. I want to tell you something true. Safety is not a feeling at first. It's a plan. It's a list. It's a door you close and a sentence you practice and the quiet that comes after you keep your own word. One day, if you keep choosing it, the quiet becomes peace. And if you're very lucky, it becomes a heartbeat, fast and brave, insisting that you build a world worthy of it.